The wind that sweeps across the endless Mongolian steppes still carries whispers of a man who changed the fate of the world. A boy born into hunger, fear, and betrayal would one day rise to command an empire so vast, so brutal, that it reshaped history itself. His name was Temujin, but the world would come to know him as Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, the scourge of God, the architect of the largest land empire ever created. It began in a place without mercy. The Mongolian steppe was a sea of grass and sky, where only the ruthless survived. Tribes clashed over horses, women, and water. Loyalty was fragile, and betrayal was currency. Into this unforgiving world, around the year 1162, a boy named Temujin was born to a chieftain named Yasuge and his kidnapped wife, Ichi. For a few short years, he knew the comfort of a tribe, but that ended when his father was poisoned by rivals, leaving his family abandoned and starving. The tribe turned its back on them, casting the young boy and his mother into exile. They survived by eating wild roots, rodents, and scraps while other children mocked and attacked them. From this misery, something unbreakable was forged. Temujin learned early that no one would save him. Every betrayal, every wound, every night spent in the freezing steppe carved into him a single truth's strength was the only law. When he was captured by enemies and enslaved, he escaped by sheer will, killing his captor in the dead of night. The boy who was once prey began to think like a predator. As the years passed, Temujin gathered loyal followers, not through fear or wealth, but through trust. He shared spoils equally, rewarded loyalty, and punished betrayal without hesitation. This was new for the Mongols, who had long been divided by tribal blood feuds. Temujin's leadership bound men together who once would have killed each other. Slowly, tribe after tribe began to unite under his banner. By 1206, after decades of warfare and betrayal, the tribes of the steppe gathered at the Anan River. There, amid the smoke of victory fires, they raised him on a white felt carpet and proclaimed him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. But even as the drums of unification thundered, his eyes were already turned outward. He saw beyond the steppe the wealthy empires that had long looked down upon his people. China to the east, the Khwarezmian Empire to the west, rich, arrogant, and ripe for conquest. The Mongol army that he built was like nothing the world had ever seen. It was an organism swift, disciplined, and utterly merciless. Every man carried multiple horses so he could ride for days without rest. They traveled light, feeding on dried meat and fermented mare's milk. They could move hundreds of kilometers in a week, appearing like ghosts, striking before the enemy even knew they were near. Their composite bows could pierce armor at 200 meters. Their tactics, fake retreats, encircled claimants, and lightning ambush turned the greatest armies into scattered prey. But Genghis Khan's true genius was psychological. He understood that terror could travel faster than any army. When a city resisted, he didn't just destroy it, he erased it. At Nishapel, when his son-in-law was killed, he ordered the execution of every living soul, men, women, and children. The chroniclers wrote that the city's skulls were piled in pyramids that touched the sky. Yet when the next city heard the tale, its gates opened without a fight. Fear itself became his most powerful weapon. He also built a code, the Yasa brutal but brilliant law, that bound his empire together. It punished theft, rewarded loyalty, and demanded absolute obedience. There were no privileges of birth in Genghis Khan's world. A slave could rise to become a general if he proved his worth, and a noble could be executed for lying. In a world ruled by bloodlines, this merit-based system made him both feared and admired. His first great campaign outside Mongolia was against the mighty Jin dynasty of northern China. Their cities were rich, their walls tall, and their armies vast. But against the Mongols, none of it mattered. Genghis used mobility, deception, and sheer endurance to bring down armies 10 times larger than his own. When he captured Beijing, the capital burned for months. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and death. Yet amid the ashes, he spared the artisans, engineers, and scholars, sending them across his empire to build, innovate, and serve. Even in destruction, he was building something larger, and empire of knowledge, trade, and power. In 1218, The Khwarezmian Empire stretching from Persia to the borders of India made a fatal mistake. Genghis sent a caravan of merchants to open trade, bearing silk, gold, and gifts. But the Shah of Khwarezm, suspicious and arrogant, saw it as he arrested the merchants and executed the Mongol envoys, a crime that, in the eyes of Genghis Khan, could only be repaid with annihilation. His response was not war, it was vengeance. In 1219, he unleashed 200,000 horsemen upon Khwarezm. The first city, Otrā, resisted and was wiped from the earth. Its governor was executed with molten silver poured into his eyes and mouth. From there, the Mongol tide swept westward Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench. Each city fell, and each time the slaughter grew worse. Chroniclers describe rivers running red and entire populations vanished. In Bukhara, Genghis rode into the great mosque and declared to the terrified survivors, "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." It was more than conquest, it was purification by fire. By the time the campaign ended, millions were dead, and Khwarezm ceased to exist. But what the world did not yet know was that Genghis Khan's conquests were not only reshaping the map, they were changing humanity itself. The ashes of Khwarezm had barely cooled when the Mongol horde began to move again. The steppe had given birth to a storm that would not stop until it touched every corner of the known world. From Persia to Russia, from the deserts of Central Asia to the walls of Eastern Europe, the name Genghis Khan spread like a curse whispered in fear. No fortress was safe, no ruler untouchably, no god powerful enough to protect his followers. The Mongols had become something greater than an armada, or a force of nature. Those who fought them spoke of demons on horseback, riders who could travel for days without stopping, men who appeared from nothing and vanished into the wind. Each Mongol warrior carried up to 3 horses, switching between them mid-ride to keep them fresh. They drank the blood of their mounts to survive long marches without food. Their bows could pierce iron armor, and their coordination was terrifying. Entire cities fell without even understanding how the battle had begun. Yet behind this unstoppable power was not Kassit was design. Genghis Khan built his army like a living machine. Each unit of 10 men was bound by loyalty. If one fled, all 10 were executed. Above them were units of 100, 1,000, and 10,000 each, perfectly structured, each drilled to move like one organism. There was no standing army in the world that could match their discipline, and behind every battle, there was strategy. Genghis Khan used spies and scouts to map enemy lands months before invasion. He used feigned retreats to lure armies into ambushes. He released captives, deliberately, to spread fear and misinformation. The Mongols didn't just fight wars, they engineered them. As the horde swept across Asia, cities that resisted vanished from the earth. The massacre of Nishi, where the population was slaughtered after the death of Genghis Khan's Sunni law, became legend. Some chroniclers claimed over 1 million died. Others said the count was meaningless, because there was no one left to count. Even children were not spared. The Mongol message was clear: surrender and live, resist and disappear. But amidst the horror, there was also order. Genghis Khan's law, the Yasa, became the spine of his empire. It outlawed theft, adultery, and deceit. It rewarded loyalty and discipline. It forbade the kidnapping of women, except in war, where captives became the spoils of victory. Within his ordo, the mobile palace that followed him across the plains, women played a silent but central role in the machinery of conquest. Bert, his first and chief wife, was his political partner and the mother of his 4 sons. She managed domestic affairs, diplomacy, and even commanded respect among the generals. Yet around her were hundreds of concubines, women taken from China, Persia, and Central Asia. They were symbols of submission, prizes of war, and bearers of future heirs. The order was a world of silk and fear, where alliances were forged not only with blood, but with marriage. Genghis Khan's daughters were given to powerful tribal leaders, ensuring loyalty through kinship. His sons inherited not just armies, but entire nations. The Khan's laws extended even to the structure of his family. In Mongol custom, when a man died, his widow was inherited by his brother Osuna, practice called Levirate, marriage. This kept property and power within the clan, but it also turned women into living instruments of dynasty. The Khan's own widows would later be passed on to his sons after his death, their bodies continuing to serve the family long after his reign had ended. Yet Genghis Khan was not a mindless butcher. Behind his cruelty was an almost mathematical vision. He saw conquest as a tool for unity, destruction as the prelude to creation. He reopened the Silk Road, re-established trade between East and West, and protected merchants under his law. His empire became the safest passage in the world. A lone traveler could carry gold from Beijing to Baghdad without fear of theft. He introduced postal systems, promoted religious tolerance, and welcomed scholars and artisans from conquered lands. But none of this softened the fear he inspired. The Mongols' reputation was so terrifying that entire cities surrendered at the first sight of their banners. In Russia, they called him the wrath of heaven. In the Islamic world, the punishment of God. In Europe, priests prayed against a phantom army said to have been sent by the devil himself. As Genghis Khan grew older, he did not slow down. In his 60s, he led campaigns into Western Xia and the Jin dynasty once again, determined to crush every power that had once defied him. Even age could not tame him. Chroniclers say that before battle, he would sit in silence, staring across the field as if he could already see the blood that would be spilled. When the drums of war began to thunder, even his enemies could feel it in their bones. The sense that this was not merely a man, but destiny itself. And yet, behind the legend, there was still the boy from the steppe, the child who had been abandoned, betrayed, and enslaved. Every conquest was an echo of that trauma. Every city burned a memory avenged. He built his empire as if trying to erase the humiliation of his youth. The world became his tribe, and all others his enemies. By 1227, the great Khan was old, but not broken. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. Millions knelt to his name, but even he could not conquer time. During his final campaign against the Tangut Kingdom, Genghis Khan fell ill, some say from injuries, others from exhaustion. On his deathbed, he made his sons swear to continue his conquest. Then, as the steppe winds howled outside his tent, the man who had ruled half the world drew his last breath. No one knows where he was buried. His tomb was hidden, his servants killed to keep the secret. Some say he rests near the Anan River. Others claim his grave lies beneath a mountain guarded by spirits. But in truth, Genghis Khan never needed a tomb. His monument was already built, carved across continents, written in blood, and whispered in the wind. His death did not end his story. It was only the beginning of a legacy that would stretch across centuries, reaching into the veins of humanity itself. When the great Khan's heartbeat fell silent, the world seemed to pause, as if the wind itself hesitated before moving again. The men outside his tent did not weep. In the Mongol way, grief was a private fire, not a public flame. His death was concealed, his body carried away in secret, wrapped in layers of felt and sealed within mystery. Even those who bore his coffin would not live to tell the tale. The funeral escort was slain to guard the resting place of the man who had once been master of all horizons. His warriors returned to battle as if nothing had happened. To the enemies of the Mongols, it was as though Genghis Khan could not die. Fear itself kept his ghost alive. But the empire he built did not crumble with his passing. It expanded, hungrier than ever. His sons and grandsons inherited not only his lands but his ruthless ambition. Gedai, his third son, took the throne and continued the conquests, pushing the empire's borders deeper into Asia and westward toward Europe. Under his command, the Mongols crossed the frozen rivers of Russia, razing cities like Ryazan and Vladimir until the bells of Kiev told their last. The world that had once seen Genghis Khan as the wrath of heaven now faced his heirs, each one molded in his image, each determined to finish what he had begun. By 1241, Mongol banners cast shadows over the heart of Europe. They rode through Poland and Hungary, burning villages, destroying cathedrals, and slaughtering armies that had never imagined such speed or discipline. The Battle of Lignites became a symbol of Europe's helplessness. Knights in shining armor fell before steppe archers who vanished before they could be touched. Chroniclers wrote of arrows falling like rain, of smoke so thick it turned noon into night. The survivors whispered that they had fought not men, but demons. And then, Just as Europe stood on the edge of collapse, the Mongols turned back. News had come from Karakoram Gedi. Khan was dead. According to tradition, all princes of Genghis Khan's line were required to return home to choose the next great Khan. The West was spared not by victory, but by fate's interruption. Yet the shadow of the Mongols lingered. For centuries, Europeans would tell stories of horsemen from the east, their hoofbeats echoing like thunder, their eyes glinting with the fire of the apocalypse. Even as they withdrew, the Mongol Empire reached its zenith. It became the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from the Korean peninsula to the plains of Hungary, from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the sands of Arabia. No other power before or since had ruled over so vast and diverse a world. And within this empire flowed the invisible legacy of Genghis Khanate, only in law or conquest, but in blood. He had fathered countless children, some born of his wives, others of the many women taken in war. His descendants married into royal families from China to Persia. Centuries later, genetic studies would reveal that around 0.5% of the world's male population, nearly 16 million men, carry a Y chromosome pattern, tracing back to one man who lived around 1,000 years ago in Mongolia. The numbers point toward one inescapable conclusion. Genghis Khan's blood still runs through the veins of humanity. His empire may have fallen, but his lineage became a river that could not be stopped. Yet power built on conquest cannot endure forever. The empire fractured into Khan's four great divisions that turned brother against brother. The Golden Horde ruled the Russian steppes. The Ilkhanate dominated Persia. The Chagatai Khanate held Central Asia. And in the east, Kublai Khan, the grandson who would one day conquer China, built a new dynasty, the Yuan, uniting the Mongol spirit with the sophistication of Chinese civilization. Under Kublai, the Mongols became emperors, scholars, and patrons of art, turning once destroyed cities into centers of culture. But the fire that had forged them began to cool. The sons of the steppe grew accustomed to silk instead of felt, to palaces instead of tents. The warriors who had ridden for days without rest now commanded from thrones, their hands soft, their hearts slower. The spirit of Genghis Khan, restless, ruthless, and wild, slowly faded into legend. The empire he built began to break apart, undone not by enemies, but by the very success that had made it great. And yet, his presence never truly vanished. Every ruin across Asia seemed to whisper his name. Every caravan road that crossed the old Mongol territory still followed paths he had once opened. His code of law, his system of governance, his respect for religious freedom all became blueprints for later empires. The world he reshaped would never return to what it was before him. To the Mongols, Genghis Khan was not just a conqueror. He was a chosen one, a man sent by eternal heaven to bring order to a chaotic world. To his enemies, he was a destroyer, a figure of pure terror. To history, he is both. His story is not one of good or evil, but of what happens when a single will reshapes the world through sheer force. Centuries after his death, his spirit still drifts across the steppes, carried by the wind over the endless grasslands where he was born. The land remains almost unchanged, vast, silent, and fierce. In that silence, you can almost hear the distant thunder of hooves, the echo of an army that once made the earth tremble. Somewhere beneath that same sky, his body lies hidden, but his legend, his shadow still rides. The empire he forged in blood and ambition changed the course of humanity. It connected continents, carried ideas and goods across borders, and left behind a legacy that still shapes nations. But it also left scars, cities, erased cultures shattered, millions enslaved or slain. His empire was both the dawn of global history and its darkest night. And so the story of Genghis Khan ends as it began, in the wind. The same wind that once whipped across his childhood steppe now carries his memory, fierce and eternal. History remembers him as the man who built an empire from nothing, who united the tribes of the steppe and then the nations of the earth beneath one name. His rise was unstoppable. His fall was inevitable, but his echo, his legend, still lives in every story of power, conquest, and destiny that followed. Because long after the last Mongol horse fell silent, the world he conquered could never forget the man who taught it what fear truly meant.